Christmas Eve dinner at our family estate in suburban Connecticut should have been magical. I sat at the mahogany table surrounded by crystal glasses and twinkling lights watching my father Robert carve the prime rib while my stepmother Patricia fussed over the place settings. My half-siblings Brandon and Melissa chatted with their spouses, and their children giggled over holiday cookies. The scene appeared picture perfect, but I knew better. When Dad raised his wine glass for what everyone expected to be a holiday toast, his words shattered everything. "Suzanne, you're disinherited. Effective immediately." The room erupted in celebratory cheers. I calmly sipped my wine and said, "Check your bank account, Dad." Robert pulled out his phone with a smugness that made my stomach turn. He expected to humiliate me further by flaunting his wealth, but as his eyes focused on the screen, his face drained of all color. His hands began trembling as he stared at zeros where millions should have been. "What the hell is this?" he whispered frantically, swiping through multiple account screens. Brandon leaned back in his chair, still grinning from the disinheritance announcement. At 28, he'd spent the last 2 years running our family construction business into the ground while living like a king. "Maybe your phone's broken, Pops. Technology isn't your strong suit." Melissa giggled beside him, twirling her designer bracelet. At 26, she'd never worked a day in her life, instead spending her time planning elaborate shopping trips funded entirely by family money. "Suzanne probably hacked it or something. You know how weird she gets with computers?" Patricia's sister Carol nodded knowingly from across the table. "Some people will do anything for attention, especially when they realize they don't deserve what they've been given." I remained silent, watching the panic spread across Robert's features as he checked his business accounts, personal savings, and investment portfolios. Every single balance showed zero. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice growing desperate. "There were $3.7 million in the primary account yesterday." That's when I finally spoke. "There were. And now those funds are safely tucked away where they can't be wasted on Brandon's incompetent business decisions or Melissa's shopping addictions." Brandon's chair scraped against the hardwood floor as he shot to his feet. "What did you do, you psycho?" I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment I'd been planning for months. "I've been managing this family's finances for 8 years, ever since you started hemorrhaging money faster than a severed artery. Every payment to cover your gambling debts, Brandon. Every credit card bill for Melissa's designer handbags. Every medical expense when Patricia's cosmetic surgeries went wrong. All of it came through accounts I controlled." The truth hit them like a sledgehammer. For the past 8 years, while they treated me like an outsider, I'd been the anonymous benefactor keeping their lavish lifestyles afloat. After Mom died when I was 12, and Robert married Patricia within a year, I became the family scapegoat. While Brandon and Melissa received luxury cars for their 16th birthdays, I worked 3 part-time jobs to pay for community college. When they got expensive educations handed to them, I earned my finance degree through night classes and student loans. But they didn't know about Mom's hidden trust fund that Robert had concealed from me, or how I'd used that seed money to build my own investment company into a multi-million-dollar operation. They had no idea I'd been funneling money into their accounts for years, covering their mistakes and protecting them from consequences they richly deserved. "You've been stealing from us," Patricia shrieked, her Botoxed face contorting into an unnatural scowl. "Stealing?" I laughed, pulling out a manila folder thick with documents. "I've been saving this family from bankruptcy 3 times over. Brandon, your construction company has lost $450,000 in the past 18 months alone. You bid on projects without proper cost analysis, missed every major deadline, and drove away clients who'd worked with this family for decades. Brandon's wife, Kelly, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew the truth about her husband's failures, but she'd kept quiet to maintain her comfortable lifestyle. And Melissa, I continued, turning to my half-sister. Your recent wedding cost $68,000. Your monthly shopping budget exceeds most people's annual salaries. Your credit cards are maxed out on purchases you hide from Jake because even you know your spending is out of control. Melissa's husband, Jake, stared at his wife in shock. $68,000, Melissa, you told me your parents only spent $20,000 on the wedding. The facade was crumbling and I wasn't finished. Patricia, your monthly spa treatments, personal shopping consultations, and cosmetic procedures cost more than most families spend on housing. And Robert, your declining health has required specialist visits and medications that your insurance doesn't fully cover because you've been too proud to admit you need help. Robert's hand shook as he set down his phone. Where is our money? Suzanne. Safe. I replied simply. Transferred to a trust fund with very specific conditions that must be met before anyone can access it. Conditions that involve accountability, responsibility, and actual work instead of entitlement. Brandon slammed his fist on the table, making the china rattle. You can't just steal our inheritance. Your inheritance! I stood slowly, my voice deadly calm. Let me explain what your inheritance actually looks like, Brandon. Without my intervention, the construction company would have declared bankruptcy 14 months ago. Your house would be in foreclosure. Your children's college funds would be empty. You'd be facing lawsuits from subcontractors you've stiffed and employees you haven't paid overtime in 2 years. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Even the children had stopped chattering, sensing the tension that filled the air like smoke. And Melissa. I turned to my half-sister. Your inheritance would include a divorce because Jake here has been secretly consulting with attorneys about your gambling debts and shopping addiction. Yes, I know about the poker games and the online spending you've been hiding. Jake, she owes $43,000 on credit cards you don't know exist. Melissa went pale as Jake stared at her in disbelief. This is family money, Patricia screeched. You have no right to control what doesn't belong to you. I pulled out a legal document and placed it on the table. Actually, I have every legal right. As of 6 months ago, I have power of attorney over all of Robert's financial and medical decisions. The room exploded into chaos as everyone began shouting at once, but Robert just stared at the document with recognition dawning in his eyes. Power of attorney. Brandon's voice cracked with disbelief. Dad would never give you power of attorney. Robert remained silent, his face growing paler as the implications sank in. Patricia grabbed the document from the table, scanning it frantically. This can't be legal, Robert. Tell them this is fake. But I wasn't just any employee at a financial firm, and they were about to learn exactly how deep my influence ran. I didn't just manage your money from the outside. I began pulling out my laptop and opening a presentation I'd prepared for this exact moment. I own and operate Sterling Financial Solutions, the investment company that's been handling your accounts for the past 5 years. The revelation hit them like a physical blow. Brandon's mouth opened and closed wordlessly, while Melissa gripped the edge of the table. Impossible, Patricia whispered. You're just a glorified bookkeeper. I'm a licensed financial advisor with a master's degree in economics and a portfolio worth $12 million, I replied calmly. While you all lived off family money, I built my own empire, and that empire has been supporting yours for longer than you realize. I clicked through slides showing the intricate web of financial support I'd provided. Brandon, when your construction project in Hartford went $200,000 over budget because you miscalculated material costs, Where do you think the money came from to avoid defaulting on the contract? When 3 of your biggest clients terminated their agreements due to missed deadlines and shoddy workmanship, who do you think covered the legal fees and penalty payments? Brandon slumped in his chair as the truth demolished his ego piece by piece. Melissa, when you maxed out your credit cards on that shopping trip to Paris and couldn't make minimum payments, who prevented your credit score from being destroyed, when you lost $20,000 in online poker games and Jake's salary couldn't cover your debts, who quietly transferred money to keep you from bankruptcy? Melissa burst into tears, finally understanding the magnitude of her reckless behavior. And Patricia, I turned to my stepmother with cold precision. When your cosmetic surgeon botched your facelift and you needed emergency reconstructive surgery that insurance wouldn't cover, who paid the $85,000 hospital bill? When your interior designer demanded payment for renovations you commissioned without Robert's knowledge, who prevented a lawsuit that would have exposed your spending to the entire community? Patricia's carefully constructed facade of superiority crumbled as she realized she'd been insulting her own financial savior for years. I continued clicking through financial records that painted a devastating picture of their incompetence. The family construction business lost $630,000 in the past 2 years under Brandon's management. He accepted contracts without proper permits, failed to secure adequate insurance, and hired subcontractors without verifying their credentials. 3 major lawsuits are still pending because of safety violations that occurred under his supervision. Kelly stared at her husband in horror. Brandon, you told me the business was doing great. You said we were expanding into new markets. We were, Brandon protested weakly. Those were just temporary setbacks. Temporary. I laughed bitterly. You owe $300,000 in unpaid bills to suppliers. Your workers have filed complaints with the state labor department for unpaid overtime and benefits. Your business license is under review because of safety violations that could have killed someone. The weight of Brandon's failures settled over the room like a suffocating blanket. Even his children playing in the adjacent rooms seemed to sense their father's shame. Robert finally found his voice. How long has this been going on? 8 years, Dad. 8 years of cleaning up messes, covering debts, and protecting this family's reputation while they treated me like an outcast. I turned to address the entire table. Did you know your country club membership was going to be revoked last month for unpaid dues? Did you realize the mortgage on this house was 3 months behind? Did you understand that without my interventions, you'd all be facing bankruptcy, divorce, and criminal charges? The silence was deafening. Carol and her husband exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly wishing they'd stayed home. But the most devastating part, I continued, is what you've done to Robert. While you've been bleeding money and living in denial, his health has been deteriorating. Patricia, you've been so focused on your social status and spending that you didn't notice your husband's memory problems. Brandon, you've been so absorbed in your failing business that you missed the signs of your father's confusion. Melissa, you've been so wrapped up in your own problems that you haven't spent real time with him in months. Robert's eyes widened as he began to understand why I'd established the power of attorney. 6 months ago, during a routine physical exam that I arranged and attended, Robert was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The doctor recommended immediate lifestyle changes, medication management, and legal preparations for his future care. I've been coordinating with neurologists, elder care specialists, and attorneys to ensure he receives proper treatment while protecting him from financial exploitation. Patricia gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Alzheimer's, Robert. You never told me you were sick. Because you've been enabling his confusion, I snapped. You manage his medications incorrectly, ignore his dietary restrictions, and encourage him to make financial decisions when he's clearly not thinking clearly. You've been taking advantage of his mental decline to extract money for your own purposes. The accusations hung in the air like poison gas choking any attempts at denial. I have documentation, I said quietly, of conversations where family members discussed how to manipulate Robert's confusion to gain access to more money. I have recordings of Patricia coaching Brandon on how to forge Robert's signature when he's having a bad day. I have evidence of financial abuse that would result in criminal charges if I chose to pursue them. Brandon jumped to his feet again, his face red with rage and embarrassment. You're lying. You can't prove any of that. I smiled sadly and pressed play on an audio file. Patricia's voice filled the room clear and unmistakable. Just wait until he's tired after his medications. He gets confused and signs whatever you put in front of him. We can access the emergency fund if you make it sound urgent enough. The blood drained from Patricia's face as her own words condemned her. Brandon sank back into his chair, realizing his mother-in-law had been using him as an accomplice in elder abuse. This is why, I said softly, I transferred control of all assets to a medical trust designed specifically for Alzheimer's care, with strict oversight and accountability measures. This is why I established power of attorney when Robert was still lucid enough to understand and consent. This is why I've been documenting every conversation and financial transaction for the past year. Robert looked around the table at his family with growing clarity. You've all been stealing from me while I've been sick. The truth settled over them like a funeral shroud, heavy and inescapable. Stealing is such an ugly word, Patricia said defensively, but her voice lacked conviction. We're family. Family takes care of each other. Takes care of each other. I pulled out another folder, this one even thicker than the first. Let me show you what taking care of family actually looks like. I spread medical records and care coordination documents across the mahogany table. While you were planning shopping trips and business ventures, I was researching Alzheimer's specialists in 3 states. I found Dr. Sarah Mitchell at Yale, who's pioneering new treatment protocols. I arranged for neuropsychological testing, medication adjustments, and dietary modifications that have slowed Robert's cognitive decline significantly. Robert stared at the documents with a mixture of gratitude and shame. You did all this without telling anyone. I tried to involve everyone initially, I replied. But when I suggested Patricia accompany us to medical appointments, she said she was too busy redecorating the guest bathroom. When I asked Brandon to help research memory care facilities, he said he didn't have time because of a golf tournament. When I invited Melissa to join support groups for families dealing with Alzheimer's, she said it was too depressing and would interfere with her yoga classes. The indictments landed like physical blows, each one revealing the depth of their selfishness and neglect. But the medical situation is just the surface. I continued pulling out investigation reports I'd commissioned. Did you know Patricia's personal shopper is actually her sister Linda, who inflates prices and splits the profit with her? Did you know Brandon's drinking problem has escalated to the point where his construction crew refuses to work with him when he's intoxicated? Did you know Melissa's gambling addiction started with online poker, but has expanded to sports betting and casino trips she takes while claiming to visit friends? Each revelation hit its target with devastating accuracy. Linda's scam explained Patricia's astronomical shopping bills. Brandon's drinking problem explained the construction company's safety violations and client complaints. Melissa's expanded gambling explained the mysterious credit card charges Jake had been questioning. How do you know all this? Kelly asked weakly, her marriage crumbling before her eyes as she realized the extent of her husband's lies. Because while you were all living in denial, I was conducting due diligence to protect Robert's assets and this family's future, I answered. I hired private investigators, consulted with addiction specialists, and worked with forensic accountants to trace where money was actually going. I turned to address Patricia directly. Speaking of money trails, let's discuss your relationship with David Richardson, the family accountant. Patricia's face turned ashen. What about David? Your affair with him began 18 months ago, but the embezzlement started earlier. He's been systematically stealing from Robert's accounts while you provided inside information about family finances and Robert's mental state. Together, you've stolen over $200,000 while manipulating a man with dementia. The accusation hung in the air like a ticking bomb. Patricia opened her mouth to deny it, but I was already playing another audio recording. David's voice filled the room. If we increase his medication dosage slightly, he'll be more confused during financial meetings. We can get him to sign transfer authorizations without him understanding what he's approving. Patricia's voice responded, How much more can we take before someone notices? The recording continued for several more damning minutes, detailing their scheme to exploit Robert's vulnerability for financial gain. Brandon stared at his stepmother with disgust. You were drugging my father to steal his money. It wasn't like that, Patricia protested desperately. The money was going to be ours eventually anyway. We were just accessing it early. Early! I stood up, my voice rising with righteous anger. You were stealing from a man with Alzheimer's disease. You were manipulating his medication to make him more vulnerable. You were committing elder abuse and fraud while pretending to be his loving wife. Robert's hands shook as the full scope of betrayal became clear. Patricia, how could you do this to me? I trusted you with everything. You still have everything, she shrieked. Suzanne is the one who stole it all. She's trying to turn you against your own family. My own family. Robert's voice grew stronger as clarity cut through his confusion. My family wouldn't drug me to steal my money. My family wouldn't manipulate my illness for financial gain. My family wouldn't abandon me to deal with a devastating diagnosis alone. The truth was finally emerging, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. I pulled out the final set of documents, these bearing official letterheads from law enforcement and regulatory agencies. Patricia, you have 48 hours to return all stolen funds before criminal charges are filed. David has already been arrested based on evidence I provided to federal investigators. His cooperation in plea negotiations depends on full restitution and testimony about your involvement. Patricia's world collapsed in real time as she realized the legal jeopardy she faced. You can't prove I knew about David's activities. Actually, I can. I smiled grimly. David wore a wire during your last 3 conversations on my recommendation. Federal agents have recordings of you planning additional thefts and discussing how to keep Robert confused and compliant. You're facing charges of elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and accessory to embezzlement. The room erupted into chaos as Patricia screamed denials and threats, while Brandon and Melissa tried to process the magnitude of their mother's crimes. Kelly gathered her children and moved toward the door, unwilling to expose them to further family toxicity. Jake stared at Melissa with a mixture of pity and revulsion, finally understanding the dysfunction he'd married into. But the most heartbreaking moment came when Robert looked around the table at the people he'd loved and trusted, seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years. How long? He asked quietly. How long has everyone been lying to me? Too long, Dad, I replied gently. But it's going to stop now. Just as the family began processing the scope of Patricia's betrayal, the front door opened and David Richardson walked in carrying a briefcase, completely unaware of the confrontation taking place. His arrival was like striking a match in a room full of gasoline. "Patricia, I brought those documents you wanted Robert to sign," he called out cheerfully, then stopped dead when he saw everyone staring at him. "David." Robert's voice was confused but alert. "What documents? What are you doing here on Christmas Eve?" David's eyes darted between Patricia's panicked face and the legal papers scattered across the table. He immediately understood he'd walked into a trap, but it was too late to retreat. "I can explain," he began, but I was already pressing record on my phone. "Please do explain," I said calmly. "Tell Robert about the documents you want him to sign. Tell him about the money you've been transferring to offshore accounts. Tell him about the medication adjustments you've been recommending to increase his confusion." David's briefcase fell from nerveless fingers, spilling forged documents and account statements across the floor. The evidence of his crimes scattered at everyone's feet like confetti at a funeral. "You said no one would find out?" he whispered to Patricia accusingly. "You promised your stepdaughter was too focused on her own career to pay attention to family finances." Patricia's last desperate lie crumbled as David threw her under the bus to save himself. "I never promised anything. You're the accountant. You're supposed to know how to hide money movement." Their finger-pointing revealed the depth of their partnership in exploiting Robert's vulnerability. But David's arrival had brought more than just evidence of their crimes. His briefcase contained documents showing they'd planned to have Robert declared legally incompetent so they could gain complete control of his estate. "Incompetent." Robert's voice grew stronger as anger burned away his confusion. "You were going to have me declared incompetent." I picked up one of the spilled documents and read aloud, "Petition for guardianship and conservatorship based on mental incapacity and inability to manage financial affairs." I looked up at Robert. "They were planning to strip away your legal rights, Dad. Once you were declared incompetent, they would have controlled everything." The betrayal was so profound that even Brandon and Melissa looked horrified. Whatever their faults, they hadn't stooped to stealing from their sick father or plotting to rob him of his basic human dignity. David tried to edge toward the door, but I blocked his path. "David, before you leave, tell Robert about the life insurance policy changes you processed without his knowledge. Tell him about the will modifications you prepared for Patricia to present during his next confused episode." Robert turned to Patricia with dawning horror. "What life insurance changes? What will modifications?" Patricia's composure finally shattered completely. "It doesn't matter now. She's stolen everything anyway. At least David and I were trying to keep the money in the family." "Keep it in the family!" Brandon exploded. "You were stealing from our father while he's dying of Alzheimer's. How is that keeping anything in the family?" But I wasn't finished revealing the scope of my intervention. "Actually, Brandon, your father, isn't dying of Alzheimer's. With proper medical care, dietary changes, and medication management, his progression has slowed significantly. Dr. Mitchell believes he could maintain his current cognitive function for years with the right support system." Robert looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Is that true? Am I not going to get worse?" "Not if we stick to the treatment plan I've arranged," I replied gently. "But it requires a stable, supportive environment free from financial stress and family conflict. It requires people who prioritize your well-being over their own greed." The implications hung heavy in the air. Robert's condition was manageable, but only if his family stopped being a source of toxic stress. I pulled out a comprehensive plan I'd spent months developing with medical professionals, elder care attorneys, and financial advisors. "This is what real family support looks like." I announced, spreading the documents across the table. I've arranged for Robert to move to Sunrise Manor, a specialized memory care community 20 minutes away. It's not a nursing home where people go to die. It's an active living facility where residents maintain independence while receiving medical support and cognitive therapy. Robert studied the brochures with interest rather than fear. This looks like a resort. Because it's designed to feel like home, I explained. You'll have your own apartment restaurant dining activity programs and medical staff available 24 hours a day. But most importantly, you'll be safe from people who want to exploit your condition for financial gain. Patricia realized her access to Robert was about to be severed completely. You can't just lock him away. I'm his wife. I have rights. You lost those rights when you drugged him to steal his money, I replied coldly. The attorneys I've consulted believe you'll be facing criminal charges within days. Your focus should be on hiring a lawyer, not on maintaining access to your victim. David tried one last desperate gambit. This is all a misunderstanding. I can transfer the money back. We can fix this. Too late, I said simply. Federal investigators have been building a case against you for 3 months. Your arrest was delayed only to gather evidence against your accomplices. Your cooperation now might reduce your sentence, but it won't eliminate your consequences. The legal machinery I'd set in motion was unstoppable. David would face federal charges for embezzlement and elder abuse. Patricia would be prosecuted for conspiracy and fraud. But my plan went beyond just punishment for the guilty. Brandon, I turned to my half-brother. You have a choice. You can continue running the construction company into the ground through incompetence and addiction, or you can enter a rehabilitation program and learn the business from experienced professionals who will teach you proper management techniques. Brandon's pride warred with his desperation. What kind of rehabilitation? 60 days of residential alcohol treatment followed by 6 months of supervised work, alongside master craftsmen who built this company's reputation before you nearly destroyed it. You'll learn construction from the foundation up instead of just being handed a management position you weren't qualified to hold. Kelly looked hopeful for the first time all evening. Brandon, this could save our marriage. The children need their father to be healthy and responsible. And Melissa, I continued, you'll enter financial counseling and gambling addiction treatment. Your spending will be monitored through a structured allowance system tied to your progress in recovery programs. Jake, you'll have complete transparency about all financial activities, and Melissa will attend marriage counseling to address the lies and deception that have poisoned your relationship. Melissa sobbed as she realized the extent of her problems, but Jake squeezed her hand. We can work through this if you're willing to get help. The transformation plan I'd developed was comprehensive and fair. Everyone would face consequences for their actions, but they'd also receive support to build healthier patterns. Most importantly, I concluded, Robert will receive the medical care and family support he deserves. His assets will be managed through a professional trust designed specifically for Alzheimer's patients. His care will be funded appropriately, and any remaining inheritance will be distributed based on demonstrated character and responsibility rather than birthright or manipulation. Robert looked around the table at his shattered family, then back at me. Suzanne, how did you know what to do? How did you plan all of this? Because someone had to, I replied simply. Because family means protecting the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. Because you raised me to believe that character matters more than comfort, and actions matter more than words. As police sirens wailed in the distance approaching to arrest David and possibly Patricia, Robert reached across the table and took my hand. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening. I'm sorry I didn't protect you from all of this. I'm sorry it took losing my mind for you to show me what real love looks like." The sirens grew louder, and David bolted for the back door, but it was too late. Justice was finally coming for those who had exploited a vulnerable man's illness for their own gain. The police officers who entered our dining room were professionals I'd been coordinating with for weeks. Detective Maria Santos introduced herself to Robert, while her partner Mark Williams secured David, who had given up his escape attempt when he realized the back door was locked. "Mr. Richardson, you're under arrest for elder abuse, embezzlement, and fraud," Detective Williams announced, reading David his rights, while Patricia watched in horror. "This is insane," Patricia screamed. "I'm calling my lawyer." Detective Santos turned to her with a calm expression. "Mrs. Richardson, I mean Mrs. Mitchell, you're welcome to call an attorney, but you should know we have warrants being prepared for your arrest as well. The evidence Ms. Sterling provided includes audio recordings, financial records, and witness testimony documenting your involvement in a conspiracy to defraud a vulnerable adult." Patricia's world collapsed as she realized the legal machinery couldn't be stopped by emotional outbursts or social connections. David was handcuffed and led toward the door, but not before he delivered one final revelation. "Tell them about the other families," he called back desperately. "Patricia, tell them about the other clients we've been working with, the Hendersons, the Krajewski family, the Williamses. They all have elderly parents with dementia." The detective's eyes sharpened as she realized they'd uncovered a larger criminal enterprise. Patricia's face went from pale to green as she understood David's betrayal had expanded her legal jeopardy exponentially. "How many other families?" Detective Santos asked me quietly. I'd suspected, but hoped I was wrong. "I can provide documentation of at least 6 other families where David served as financial advisor, and Patricia provided social connections to gain access to elderly clients with cognitive decline." The scope of their crimes was staggering. They hadn't just targeted Robert. They'd been systematically exploiting vulnerable seniors throughout their affluent Connecticut community. As the police escorted David away and prepared to process Patricia, I turned to address my remaining family members. This is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when actions have real consequences instead of being covered up or ignored. Brandon stared at the handcuffs on Patricia's wrists. "I never knew she was doing anything criminal. I thought she was just difficult." "Difficult?" I laughed bitterly. "Brandon, she was coaching you to forge Dad's signature. She was encouraging you to approach him for money when his medications made him confused. How did you think that was just difficult?" Kelly spoke up from the corner where she'd been shielding her children from the chaos. "Brandon, you knew something was wrong. You complained about your father's confusion, but you never suggested getting medical help. You just saw it as an opportunity to get money more easily." The truth was finally being spoken aloud. Brandon had known his father was struggling, but instead of offering support, he'd seen it as a chance to exploit weakness for financial gain. "And Melissa," I continued, "you noticed Dad forgetting conversations and repeating stories, but instead of expressing concern, you laughed about it with friends. You called it cute that he was getting forgetful. You never considered that he might be suffering from a serious medical condition." Melissa's tears flowed harder as she faced her own callousness. "I didn't know it was Alzheimer's. I thought he was just getting old." "Because you didn't want to know," Robert said quietly. "None of you wanted to face the possibility that I might need care instead of being able to provide money." The police finished processing Patricia, who was led away, still screaming about lawyers and false accusations. Detective Santos left her contact information and promised to follow up as the investigation continued. When the chaos finally subsided, the remaining family members sat in uncomfortable silence around the dining table that had witnessed so much deception and betrayal. "What happens now?" Kelly asked tentatively. I pulled out the final set of documents in my presentation, these bearing the letterhead of Hartford Memorial Hospital's Addiction Treatment Center and Fairfield County Family Services. "Now we rebuild," I announced. "Brandon, you have 24 hours to decide whether you want to enter the residential treatment program I've arranged. Kelly has agreed to support you through recovery, but only if you commit completely to sobriety and learn to manage the construction business responsibly." Brandon looked at his wife and children, then back at me. "What if I refuse? Then the business will be sold to pay debts, your house will go into foreclosure when you can't make payments, and Kelly will file for divorce to protect herself and the children from your financial destruction." I didn't soften the reality. "Your choice is between getting help or losing everything, including your family." Kelly nodded grimly. "I've already consulted with attorneys, Brandon. I love you, but I won't let you destroy our children's future because you're too proud to admit you need help." The ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. Brandon could choose recovery and responsibility, or he could choose pride and lose everything that mattered. "Melissa." I turned to my half-sister. "You have similar options: financial counseling, gambling addiction treatment, and complete transparency about all spending, or Jake files for divorce and seeks full custody of the baby you're carrying." Melissa's hand flew to her barely visible pregnancy bump. "How did you know?" Jake answered quietly. "I told Suzanne when I called her for advice about our marriage problems. She's the one who helped me understand that your gambling and lying were symptoms of addiction, not character flaws." The revelation that Jake had been consulting with me secretly showed how desperate their situation had become. He'd reached out for help because he wanted to save his marriage, not destroy it. "The treatment programs are voluntary," I continued, "but the consequences for refusing are automatic. I've spent months arranging support systems, but I won't enable continued destructive behavior by removing consequences." Robert looked around at his family with clearer understanding than he'd shown in months. "Suzanne, what about me? What are my choices?" I softened my voice when addressing him. "Dad, your choice is whether you want to move to Sunrise Manor voluntarily or wait until your condition deteriorates to the point where involuntary placement becomes necessary. The memory care facility I selected specializes in maintaining independence and cognitive function for as long as possible." Robert studied the facility brochures again, then looked at his family. "Will I be able to see everyone? As often as you want, as long as visits are supportive rather than stressful. Your health and safety come first, but maintaining family relationships is important for cognitive preservation." The evening that had begun with celebration and traditional family dinner was ending with legal arrests and mandatory treatment programs. But for the first time in years, there was also hope for genuine healing and authentic relationships. "I'll do the treatment," Brandon said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes to save my marriage and learn to be a real father to my children." Melissa nodded through her tears. "Me too. I don't want to lose Jake or hurt our baby with my problems." Robert stood slowly and walked to where I sat. "Suzanne, I don't deserve your help after how I've treated you, but I'm grateful for everything you've done. You saved this family when no one else cared enough to try." As I hugged my father, feeling him hold me with genuine love for the first time since childhood, I realized that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what's actually worth saving. 6 months after the Christmas Eve confrontation that shattered our family's facade, I stood in my modest but warm apartment kitchen, preparing dinner for a very different kind of holiday gathering. The transformation that had occurred was nothing short of miraculous, not because of any supernatural intervention, but because of the hard work and genuine commitment each family member had invested in their own healing. Brandon knocked on my door precisely at 5 o'clock, carrying a homemade apple pie and wearing the kind of smile I hadn't seen from him since childhood. Behind him, Kelly held the hands of their 2 children who raced past their parents to hug me with the uninhibited affection of kids who finally felt secure in their family's stability. Aunt Suzanne. 7-year-old Emma squealed, wrapping her arms around my waist. "Daddy says you're the reason our family is happy now." Brandon's face reddened slightly, but he nodded. "She's right. I owe you more than I can ever repay." The man standing in my doorway bore little resemblance to the entitled, angry person who had threatened me 6 months earlier. 5 months of sobriety had cleared the alcohol-induced puffiness from his face, revealing strong features I'd forgotten he possessed. More importantly, his eyes held clarity and purpose instead of the desperate cunning that had characterized his drinking years. "How's the business?" I asked, as we moved into the living room. Brandon's pride was evident but tempered with humility. "We're actually profitable for the first time in 3 years. Having experienced foremen teach me the trade properly made all the difference. I finally understand why clients were frustrated with my work before." Kelly squeezed his hand affectionately. "He comes home excited about projects instead of stressed about covering up mistakes. The change is incredible." The transformation in their marriage was visible in their body language and easy communication. Brandon had learned to be honest about challenges instead of hiding them behind alcohol and bravado. Kelly had regained respect for her husband now that he was earning it through competence and integrity rather than demanding it through family connections. Melissa arrived 20 minutes later, her pregnancy now obvious at 7 months along. She moved carefully but happily, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a maternity dress that was stylish without being expensive. Jake walked beside her, one protective hand on her back, his face radiating contentment instead of the stressed worry that had characterized their relationship for years. "How's the financial counseling going?" I asked, as I helped her settle into the most comfortable chair. Melissa beamed. "I'm actually good with money now. Can you believe it? I track every expense, stick to our budget, and haven't placed a single bet since entering treatment. Jake handles the credit cards, but I don't even want to spend impulsively anymore." Jake nodded, his relief obvious. "The transparency has rebuilt trust between us. I know where every dollar goes, and Melissa asks before making any purchase over $20. It sounds restrictive, but it's actually freeing because there are no more financial surprises or hidden debts." The most remarkable change in Melissa wasn't just her responsible spending, but her genuine interest in other people's well-being. She'd channeled her need for excitement into volunteer work with families struggling with addiction and financial literacy, finding purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes that had nearly destroyed her own life. "I'm starting a support group for spouses dealing with gambling addiction," she announced proudly. 3 other women from my treatment program want to share their experiences and help newly diagnosed families. As we gathered around my small dining table, one crucial family member joined us through video call. Robert appeared on my laptop screen from the community room at Sunrise Manor, looking healthier and more alert than he had in years. "Hello, everyone." His voice came through clearly, strong and warm. "I wish I could be there in person, but Dr. Mitchell says family stress should still be minimized." Robert's transformation had been the most dramatic of all. Proper medication management, Regular exercise, cognitive therapy, and the elimination of financial stress had slowed his Alzheimer's progression significantly. His good days outnumbered his confused ones, and he'd regained much of his sharp wit and emotional warmth. "Dad, you look great," Brandon said, leaning toward the screen. "How's the woodworking class?" Robert's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I'm making a rocking chair for Melissa's baby. The occupational therapist says working with my hands helps maintain fine motor skills and cognitive function. Plus, I love creating something beautiful instead of just worrying about money all the time." The conversation flowed naturally, with everyone sharing positive updates about their lives and futures. Brandon discussed construction projects he was genuinely excited about completing. Kelly talked about returning to teaching now that their finances were stable and transparent. Melissa shared her plans for returning to college part-time after the baby was born, pursuing a degree in social work to formalize her passion for helping struggling families. But the most significant update came from Jake, who had surprising news that affected everyone. "I've been offered a promotion that would require relocating to Portland, Oregon," he announced. "Melissa and I have been discussing whether to accept it." The room fell silent as everyone processed the implications. Melissa would be moving across the country just as the family was rebuilding its relationships. "What did you decide?" I asked gently. Melissa reached for Jake's hand, her face serene despite the magnitude of the decision. "We're going. Jake's career opportunity is too good to pass up, and honestly, some distance from our old patterns and social circles will be healthy for our marriage." Robert nodded approvingly from the screen. "Your mother always said that sometimes you have to leave what's familiar to grow into who you're meant to become." The reference to my mother was startling because Robert rarely mentioned her anymore, but it felt healing rather than painful. He was remembering the good advice she'd given rather than just the loss of her presence. "Besides," Melissa continued, "Portland has excellent addiction treatment resources and financial counseling services. We can maintain our progress while building a new life around healthy choices instead of trying to change old environments." The decision showed remarkable maturity and self-awareness from a woman who 6 months earlier had been drowning in debt and denial. As dinner wound down and the children played with toys in the living room, Robert asked to speak privately with me. The others moved to the kitchen to clean dishes while I carried the laptop to my bedroom. "Suzanne." Robert's voice was serious but loving. "I need you to know how proud I am of the woman you've become. When I said you were disinherited, I was angry about things that weren't really your fault. I was taking out my frustrations about my illness and Patricia's betrayal on the one person who was actually trying to help me." I felt tears welling up at his words, the validation I'd waited for my entire adult life. "Your mother would be so proud of how you handled this crisis," he continued. "She always said you had her strength and my stubbornness, and that combination would either destroy you or make you unstoppable. I'm grateful it made you unstoppable." The conversation represented a healing that went deeper than financial recovery or addiction treatment. It was the restoration of a father-daughter relationship that had been damaged by years of favoritism, neglect, and misplaced priorities. "Dad, there's something else," I said, taking a deep breath. "Marcus and I are getting married in April, and I'd like you to walk me down the aisle." Robert's face broke into the widest smile I'd seen from him in decades. "Are you sure my condition might make things complicated?" "Dr. Mitchell thinks the stress levels will be manageable with proper planning, and I want my father there for the most important day of my life." The joy on his face was worth every difficult moment of the past year. Despite everything that had happened, we were still father and daughter, and that relationship could be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine love rather than obligation and resentment. As the evening ended and everyone prepared to leave, Brandon pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Suzanne, I know I can never fully make up for how I treated you, but I want you to know that my kids will grow up knowing what you did for our family. They'll understand that real strength means protecting people who can't protect themselves, and real success means using your abilities to heal rather than to hurt." Kelly joined us, adding her own gratitude. "You saved our marriage and our family's future. Emma and Michael will have college funds and stable parents because you refused to let us destroy ourselves." As I hugged them goodbye, I realized that the family I'd always wanted had finally emerged from the ashes of the dysfunctional one I'd grown up with. It wasn't perfect, and it required ongoing work and commitment, but it was built on truth, accountability, and genuine care rather than money manipulation and fear. The Christmas dinner that had begun with my disinheritance had ultimately led to my inheritance of something far more valuable: a family that chose to love and support each other because they wanted to, not because they had to. 1 year later, on a perfect April morning, I stood in the bridal suite of a small chapel overlooking Long Island Sound, adjusting my simple but elegant wedding dress. Through the window, I could see Marcus greeting guests with the kind of genuine warmth that had made me fall in love with him 3 years earlier. When he'd learned the truth about my family crisis, he hadn't run away from the complexity. Instead, he'd offered quiet support and understanding that sustained me through the most difficult period of my life. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, expecting my friend Sarah, who was serving as my maid of honor. Instead, Robert entered the room, moving carefully but independently. He wore a navy blue suit that fit perfectly, his hair neatly styled, and his eyes clear and bright. For a moment, I saw the strong, confident man he'd been before illness and family dysfunction had clouded his judgment. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother would be so proud." I rushed to embrace him, careful not to wrinkle either of our outfits. "Dad, you look wonderful. How are you feeling?" "Strong enough to walk my daughter down the aisle and tell her how grateful I am for everything she's done," he replied, holding me at arm's length to study my face. "Dr. Mitchell says my cognitive function has improved so much that she's considering reducing my medication dosage." The progress was remarkable. Eliminating family stress, providing proper medical care, and ensuring he lived in a supportive environment had given him back years of quality life. He wasn't cured, and we all understood his condition would eventually progress, but he was living fully in the present, rather than merely surviving. "Are you ready to see the family?" I asked, knowing that today would be an emotional reunion for everyone. Robert nodded, his face brightening with anticipation. "I've been looking forward to this for months." As we walked toward the chapel, I could see the small gathering of people who had become my true family through shared struggle and mutual commitment to healing. Brandon stood near the altar in his role as Marcus's best man, a responsibility he'd earned through 18 months of sobriety and demonstrated reliability. His transformation from entitled alcoholic to dependable family member was nothing short of miraculous. Kelly sat in the front row with Emma and Michael, who would serve as flower girl and ring bearer. The children glowed with happiness and security, their parents' stable marriage providing the foundation for healthy childhood development. Kelly had returned to teaching and found deep satisfaction in her work, while Brandon managed the construction business with competence and integrity that had restored the company's reputation in the community. Melissa was conspicuously absent, but not due to family conflict. She and Jake were thriving in Portland, where their baby daughter Lily was now 6 months old. They'd sent a beautiful video message expressing their love and gratitude, along with photos of their new home and Jake's successful career advancement. Melissa's volunteer work with addiction recovery had evolved into a part-time job with a nonprofit organization, giving her purpose and income while allowing her to care for Lily. The most surprising attendee was Carol Patricia's sister, who had asked permission to come despite the family's complicated history. After Patricia's conviction and 18-month prison sentence, Carol had reached out to apologize for her previous judgment and offer support for Robert's recovery. She'd become an unexpected ally, helping coordinate visits and providing companionship during Robert's adjustment to memory care. Marcus's family filled the other side of the chapel, warm and welcoming people who had embraced me completely once they understood my commitment to family healing rather than family destruction. His parents, both retired teachers, had been particularly supportive of my decision to prioritize Robert's care over personal convenience. As the ceremony began and Robert walked me down the aisle, I reflected on the incredible journey that had brought us to this moment. The Christmas dinner that had seemed like the end of my family had actually been its beginning. Losing my inheritance had taught me that true wealth couldn't be stolen or given away. It had to be earned through character, protected through integrity, and shared through love. When Marcus and I exchanged vows, we promised not just to love each other, but to continue building the kind of family that prioritized healing over comfort, truth over convenience, and growth over stability. Our marriage would be different because we'd both learned that real commitment requires work honesty and the willingness to face difficult truths together. The reception was small but joyful, held in the chapel's garden overlooking the water. Brandon gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, acknowledging his past failures while expressing gratitude for second chances and family forgiveness. Robert offered a toast that was coherent, heartfelt, and full of wisdom about the importance of choosing family based on character rather than DNA. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself talking with Dr. Mitchell, who had become more than just Robert's physician. She'd become a friend and advisor who helped me understand that my intervention had been necessary and appropriate, rather than controlling or manipulative. "You know," she said as we watched Robert dancing with Emma, "cases like your family's are why I went into geriatric medicine. Too often, families either abandon elderly members or enable their decline through neglect or exploitation. What you did took incredible courage and wisdom." "It didn't feel courageous at the time," I admitted. "It felt desperate and terrifying." Dr. Mitchell smiled. "Courage usually does, but you chose to act on love rather than fear, and you prioritized long-term healing over short-term peace. That's the definition of wisdom." As evening approached and guests began to leave, Marcus and I sat with Robert on a bench overlooking the water. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, creating a backdrop of beauty that matched the peace in my heart. "I have something for you," Robert said, pulling a small wrapped package from his jacket pocket. "Your mother left this for your wedding day. I should have given it to you years ago, but I was too caught up in my own problems to remember what was really important." Inside the box was my mother's engagement ring, a simple but elegant solitaire that she'd worn for 25 years. But wrapped around the ring was a letter in her handwriting dated shortly before her death. "My dearest Suzanne." The letter began, "If you're reading this, it means you've found someone worthy of the incredible woman I know you'll become. Your strength and compassion will be tested by life, but I have complete faith that you'll choose love over fear, healing over revenge, and family over convenience. Remember that true wealth is measured in relationships, not bank accounts, and that the greatest inheritance you can give or receive is the knowledge that you are deeply loved for who you are, not what you possess. As I read my mother's words aloud, Robert wept openly, finally grieving not just her death, but the years of poor decisions that had followed. Marcus held my hand while I cried, understanding that these weren't tears of sadness, but of completion and peace. "She knew," Robert whispered. "Even while she was dying, she knew you'd be the one to save this family." The revelation that my mother had understood my future role in the family's healing felt like her final gift to me. She'd seen my potential for leadership and strength, even when I was just a 12-year-old girl mourning her loss. As we sat together watching the sunset 3 generations of a family that had chosen healing over destruction, I finally understood the true meaning of inheritance. It wasn't money or property or social status. It was the wisdom to love people enough to hold them accountable, the courage to make difficult decisions for long-term benefit rather than short-term comfort, and the commitment to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was broken. My father had disinherited me of material wealth, but he'd unknowingly given me something far more valuable: the opportunity to discover my own strength, to learn the true meaning of family, and to understand that love without boundaries isn't love at all, but enabling. 3 months after the wedding, Marcus and I received the news that would complete our family's transformation. We were expecting our first child. Robert's joy was infectious as he talked about becoming a grandfather again, this time, to a child who would grow up knowing that family meant supporting each other through challenges rather than exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. The baby would be born into a family that had learned the hard way that money couldn't buy happiness, integrity couldn't be inherited, and love had to be earned through actions rather than demanded through birthright. But most importantly, our child would grow up understanding that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the courage to face their own destructive patterns and choose growth over comfort. As I write this story sitting in the nursery, we've prepared for our daughter. I can see the construction company trucks parked outside Brandon's house across the street. He's built the business into something he's genuinely proud of, employing skilled craftsmen who respect him for his competence rather than his family name. Kelly teaches at the elementary school down the road, and their children are thriving academically and socially. Melissa sends weekly updates from Portland, where she's completed her social work degree and started her own practice helping families navigate addiction and financial crises. Jake's career has flourished, and little Lily is walking and beginning to talk, surrounded by parents who've learned to communicate honestly and support each other through challenges. Robert continues to live at Sunrise Manor, participating in programs designed to maintain his cognitive function while enjoying friendships with other residents who've become like extended family. His good days far outnumber his difficult ones, and he's involved in planning for his future grandchild with enthusiasm and wisdom. Patricia completed her prison sentence and moved to Florida, where she's reportedly working as a retail clerk and living quietly. We don't maintain contact, but I hope she's found peace and learned from her mistakes. Forgiveness doesn't require relationship, but it does require releasing the anger that once consumed so much of my energy. The greatest lesson I've learned is that family isn't defined by DNA or marriage certificates, but by the willingness to love people enough to tell them the truth, set appropriate boundaries, and support their growth even when it's difficult or inconvenient. Real love sometimes requires saying no, enforcing consequences, and prioritizing long-term well-being over short-term comfort. To anyone listening who's struggling with toxic family patterns, financial exploitation, or the challenge of loving someone with addiction or mental health issues, I want you to know that change is possible. It requires courage, planning, professional support, and the willingness to accept that you can't control other people's choices, but you can control your own responses. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is remove your support from destructive behavior, even when it causes temporary pain or conflict. Sometimes, saving a family requires dismantling its dysfunctional patterns completely before rebuilding on a foundation of truth and accountability. As I prepare for motherhood, I'm committed to raising a child who understands that her worth isn't determined by what she owns. Her relationships aren't transactions based on financial benefit, and her family's love is unconditional, but not without boundaries. She'll grow up knowing that real strength means protecting vulnerable people from exploitation. Real success means using your abilities to heal rather than harm. And real wealth is measured in the quality of your relationships and the integrity of your character. The Christmas dinner that began with my disinheritance and ended with my family's transformation taught me that sometimes losing everything material is the only way to gain everything that truly matters. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't what's left to you, but what you choose to leave behind. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping peace and doing what was right? How did you find the courage to stand up for someone who couldn't protect themselves? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family healing and finding strength in difficult circumstances. And please share this with anyone who might be struggling with similar family challenges. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of a community that believes in the power of love, truth, and second chances. May you find the courage to choose healing over comfort, growth over convenience, and authentic love over comfortable lies. Until next time, remember that your true inheritance is the person you choose to become and the love you choose to share.